Supporting the Chinese Communist Party is the moral thing to do? Some people just don't get China. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The Chinese Communist Party. It commits genocide, uses rape as a form of torture, and considers itself at war with the United States. It feels like China is Stewie from Family Guy. They're openly evil and trying to take over the world, but for some reason no one seems to hear what they say. The Chinese Communist Party has cost the U.S. economy $600 billion a year in intellectual property theft. American jobs have disappeared because the party exploits the Chinese people using cheap labor, sometimes even slave labor. The Communist Party is actively killing tens of thousands of Americans each year by pumping the U.S. full of fentanyl. So why aren't we, doing something to stop that? How is that not higher on our to-do list? When your starting point is that China is run by a Marxist-Leninist regime that's committing crimes against humanity and is actively trying to destroy America, everything falls into place. Ban TikTok? Of course. And you wouldn't be talking about tripling your investment in China. Why pump billions of dollars into a regime that is trying to destroy you? That's like giving all your money to your ex-wife, not because the courts are forcing you, but because you think it's a sound financial decision. The problem is many think tanks, politicians, and so-called experts don't fundamentally understand this. They don't understand that the Chinese Communist Party is a threat. That was on full display in the Biden administration's China policy. It took a year and a half for that policy to come out because of the fierce debate that happens in any administration between those who understand the CCP threat and those who want to do business in China. You can tell which faction influenced what. When Secretary of State Antony Blinken unveiled the China policy last year, he did talk about things like China's asymmetric decoupling. That's where China is trying to make itself less dependent on the world while making the world more dependent on China. And he said the Chinese regime was committing genocide.
The United States stands with countries and people around the world against the genocide and crimes against humanity happening in the Xinjiang region, where more than 1 million people have been placed in detention camps because of their ethnic and religious identity.
As you'd imagine, the U.S. reaction to this was, "That's no problem for us." I'm only half joking, because then came the weird cognitive dissonance.
We are not looking for conflict or a new Cold War. To the contrary, we're determined to avoid both. We don't seek to block China from its role as a major power, nor to stop China, or any other country for that matter, from growing their economy or advancing the interests of their people. There's no reason why our great nations cannot coexist peacefully and share in and contribute to human progress together.
Tell that to all the Americans dying from Chinese fentanyl. Now compare what Blinken said to this speech by Robert O'Brien, the former national security advisor under President Trump.
Now let's be clear, the Chinese Communist Party is a Marxist-Leninist organization. The party General Secretary Xi Jinping sees himself as Joseph Stalin's successor.
It's important to understand that ideology because it means there is no way to work with the Chinese Communist Party. That'd be like introducing people to your new business partner saying, "Yeah, he wants to kill me because I'm a capitalist pig, but look at the quarterlies."
Under communism, individuals are merely a means to be used towards the achievement of the ends of the collective nation state. Thus, individuals can be easily sacrificed for the nation state's goals. Individuals do not have inherent value under Marxism-Leninism. They exist to serve the state. The state does not exist to serve them.
Nevertheless, really smart people continue to get that wrong. This worldview and all its problems are perfectly summarized in this article. It's basically a masterclass on everything people get wrong about China and the Chinese Communist Party. I haven't seen anything this fundamentally flawed since mustard-flavored ice cream. Yes, that's real. The world is a dark place. And it's important for you to know these arguments and understand why they're wrong. Otherwise, what might seem at first like perfectly rational ideas will bring catastrophe to the world. I'll take that article apart right after this quick break. Welcome back. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It's a big help with YouTube's algorithms, and it helps us get the message out there. So, let's take a look at this article. Stopping China's growth cannot be a goal for the West. On the surface, it seems reasonable, very rational. But I'll show you why it fundamentally gets China wrong. And I'm not going to focus on who wrote this, because my purpose isn't to criticize an individual, but to expose this line of thinking that's actually pretty common, and that's aiding the rise of the Chinese Communist Party. The article starts with this question: do we want China to fail? Surely, if you regard a country as a threat and a rival, you do not want to see its economy growing rapidly. Already, it's wildly off the mark. This isn't just like seeing a runner trip at the starting line, it's like watching them fire the starting pistol into their own foot. It's blurring the line between China and the Chinese Communist Party. That's actually one of the party's main propaganda lines, that there is no China without the Communist Party. Criticizing the party is criticizing China. That's bogus. The Chinese Communist Party is not China. It's a Marxist-Leninist regime that has brutalized the Chinese people for the past 70 years. When it falls, that's what will make China rise. But with that false premise, the article continues, if you want China to go into recession, you are quite close to wanting the world to also slide into recession. Sounds bad, right? Well, the problem is the entire world has become incredibly dependent on an authoritarian regime. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe realized that becoming dependent on cheap Russian gas and oil was not a good long-term plan. That's like saying you shouldn't have rooted for Jeffrey Dahmer to be caught, because his coworkers at the chocolate factory he worked at depended on him. Maybe we should look more closely into who we're doing business with. China dominates America's medical supply chain. That was a big problem when COVID broke out. According to Rosemary Gibson, author of the book China RX, if China shut the door on exports of medicines and their key ingredients and raw materials, U.S. hospitals and military hospitals and clinics would cease to function within months, if not days. In other words, it would be a lot better if America became economically independent from a Marxist-Leninist state that wants to destroy America. As long as the Communist Party controls China, the global economy would be more stable staying away from China. Because as we've seen through China's real estate crisis and its zero COVID policy, the Chinese economy is already in chaos. At some point, it will collapse, regardless of what the West does. The best way to protect the global economy is not by trying to prop up a sinking ship, but by decoupling now. Next, the article says, then there is the moral question. Are you comfortable with wanting more than 1.4 billion Chinese, many of them still poor, to get poorer? So, the moral thing to do is pump money into a regime that's committing genocide? That uses rape as a form of torture? That forced pregnant women to have abortions? You know, what about North Korea's poor? Maybe the thing to do is invest in North Korea. It is true there is a lot of poverty in China, and that isn't because of anything the U.S. does. It's because of a badly managed state-run economy where people have no rights, no ability to unionize or protest, and at any point, you can be declared an enemy of the state and have all your stuff taken away. Most people in China are poor because they don't have the freedom to be wealthy. Massive corruption has allowed a sliver of Chinese society to become ungodly rich, though. And usually those people are Communist Party officials or their relatives. And that's exactly how the Chinese Communist Party wants it. Even though China is the second largest economy in the world, the party says China is still a developing country. So it doesn't have to abide by the same economic, trade, and environmental rules that developed countries, like the US, have to. So by pumping money into China, it's like giving charity to billionaires, hoping they'll take care of their neglected kids. I wouldn't hold my breath. But the article says it's not just Chinese people who would get poorer. Demand and investment from China are critical to countries in Africa and the Americas. Do you want them to get poorer as well? That's funny, because I was under the impression that Chinese investment was trapping those countries into crippling debt and extracting natural resources, leaving more poverty and environmental destruction. Like when China buys up cobalt mined by child labor in Africa. That's why China's actions have been called neo-colonialism. And yet, to summarize the article so far, standing up to the Chinese Communist Party means bringing economic devastation to China and the world. Next comes this false dichotomy. The fact that such a debate is taking place at all says something about the current confusion in Western capitals. Broadly speaking, two models of world order are doing battle in the minds of Western policymakers. An old model based around globalization and a new one based around great power competition. The old model based on globalization is a twisted notion that we can do business with dictators as long as we make some money. That didn't work out well. And as we enter the end of globalization, we aren't entering a period of great power competition. We're entering a time where countries have to realize that freedom and rule of law are the best way to achieve true prosperity. And that is incompatible with regimes like the Chinese Communist Party. Since the Communist Party cherishes freedom as much as Jeff Bezos cherishes hairbrushes, or, his workers. However, the article says the old model stresses economics and what the Chinese call win-win cooperation. Its argument is that economic stability and growth are good for everyone, and that it also encourages useful habits of international cooperation on critical issues such as climate change. That is probably the most pure Communist Party propaganda in the whole piece. I'm starting to wonder who really wrote this article. Xi Jinping talks about win-win cooperation all the time. But remember, the Chinese Communist Party also talks about spreading international communism and destroying America. Opening up China to global financial markets did not bring reform to China. Instead, it became the weapon the Chinese regime used against the free world. While some people have gotten rich, American manufacturing has been completely hollowed out. Intellectual property theft has led to cheap Chinese knockoffs that drove American companies out of business. It sounds nice to say we can all get along for mutual benefit, but again, when one side is a Marxist-Leninist regime actively trying to destroy you, don't you think that's a little stupid? Also, working together on climate change, China's emissions are greater than the entire developed world combined. But since China claims to be just a poor developing country, they should actually be allowed to increase coal production. Wow, China really is like Stewie from Family Guy. They can get away with anything because everyone sees them as just a baby. Also, if you think the Chinese Communist Party will honor any international agreement, go talk to someone from Hong Kong. You know what? Let's take a quick break while I try to cool down, which will be hard since China contributes more than anyone to global warming. Welcome back. I don't feel any calmer. Let's carry on. The article says a China that fails could be a threat to world stability, and so could a China that succeeds, as long as it is run by Xi or another nationalist authoritarian. Now, I actually agree with this point, because again, the article is entirely wrong when it says fighting the Chinese Communist Party means you want China to fail. I don't think anyone really wants China to fall into chaos. That wouldn't be much better than the current situation. But there's no evidence that chaos has to follow the collapse of the CCP. And what I don't get is why he calls Xi Jinping a nationalist authoritarian. Why is it so hard for people to call him what he is? A communist. He's the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. And as long as it is the sole political party in China, any leader of China will be a communist. That's like saying, whoa, you're calling that guy a Nazi just because he's the leader of the Nazi party? Way to jump to conclusions. So what does the article say is the solution? The way for Western policymakers to resolve the debate is to ask a different sort of question. Not, do we want China to succeed or fail, but how do we manage the continuing rise of China? So the problem is still the fundamental one. You've conflated China with the Chinese Communist Party. We should not support the continuing rise of the CCP. We should want a free and open China with rule of law and human rights. Supporting that is how you help China rise. Supporting a regime that kills its own citizens for their organs is not. The article goes on to say the goal should be to mold a world order that makes it less attractive for China to pursue aggressive policies. So they're saying if we're all nice enough, the Chinese Communist Party will eventually be nicer too. One problem, though, if we continue to pump money into China, how are we discouraging the CCP from aggressive policies? China's surveillance state and internet censorship? Built by Western tech companies looking to make money in China. Harvesting organs from prisoners of conscience, only possible because of transplant techniques learned from partnering with Western medical institutions looking to make money in China. Xi's fashion sense? Totally stolen from Don Draper. You know he totally would have done an ad campaign for the CCP. He really was a madman. Now, I do think the article makes some good points. This, for example. The U.S. is taking action against the CCP, but economics and trade are where the U.S. is weakest. China is already the largest trading partner for most countries in the Indo-Pacific. America's increasingly protectionist mood and inability to sign significant new trade deals in Asia make Washington's counteroffer look ever less compelling. Countering the Chinese Communist Party can't just be the U.S. pulling investment from China. The U.S. must provide an alternative to the CCP for nations around the world. The U.S. needs to be the backbone of a global world order in a similar way it did for much of the 20th century. Then the U.S. got lazy, which, to be fair, is kind of what the U.S. has become known for. Take the case of the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific. Even though one of the most important battles of World War II was fought there, the U.S. eventually closed their embassy in the Solomons for decades. So China was the only game in town. And now the Solomon Islands has signed a security deal that could put a Chinese military base right on Australia's doorstep. Not to mention that China is now training Solomon Islands police. The article concludes with, "It is crucial for the US and the EU to be clear, to themselves and others, that their goal is not to prevent China from becoming richer. It is to prevent China's growing wealth from being used to threaten its neighbors or intimidate its trading partners." Well, I'm sorry to say that's stupid, because any wealth the Chinese Communist Party gets will be used to keep an iron grip on Chinese society and spread the Chinese regime's power and interests globally. This is like thinking a meth head that finds a bunch of money is going to spend it on anything other than meth. Like, maybe if you're really, really nice to them. You cannot treat a Marxist-Leninist regime like it's a liberal democracy. Again, I'm not trying to criticize the author of this Financial Times piece. The problem is this bizarre materialistic worldview that money makes everything right. It's a widespread belief, and it's allowed the Communist Party to ride roughshod over the world. It's time we put doing something about it much higher on our to-do list. And China Uncensored would not be possible without support from viewers like you, either by liking and subscribing, sharing the show with friends and family, or buying one of these awesome new West Taiwan travel posters from our merch store. Buy them with the link below. And of course, a special thanks to everyone who gives direct support on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Those are the fans I call the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, who join us in the fight against the Chinese Communist Party. As a thank you to them, I respond to their questions. Today's question comes from Flora Chen. Can you confirm if it is true that China's government is banning its domestic travel, but allowing its people to travel overseas? Excellent question. So for years, part of China's zero COVID policy meant restricting people's ability to travel. It wasn't impossible for people to go overseas, but it was very difficult. However, great news! Zero COVID travel restrictions have been lifted, just in time for the Lunar New Year, when people love to travel, as another major wave of COVID is spreading through China. Now, when COVID first spread, it was also during the Lunar New Year. And there was evidence that as COVID was spreading, they encouraged international travel from Wuhan, but blocked domestic travel to and from Wuhan. How about that? Currently, though, I haven't heard anything about limiting domestic travel. The Chinese regime is very publicly encouraging more domestic travel and tourism because they want the economy to recover ASAP. though people seem a little reluctant to travel for some reason. But there are concerns about China spreading its new COVID surge globally. State Department spokesman Ned Price said any time the virus was spreading, it had the potential to mutate and could pose a threat to people everywhere, which is why many countries, including the U.S., are requiring negative COVID tests from travelers from China. Meanwhile, Chinese state-run media is also very publicly encouraging more outbound or international tourism from China, and complaining that other countries requiring travelers from China to test negative are discriminating against them. This all feels very familiar. Thanks for your question and your support, Flora. And thank you for watching. If you want to support China Uncensored, all it takes is $1 per episode over at patreon.com/China Uncensored. China Uncensored would not exist without your support. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.